Mark Thompson slammed his hand on the boardroom table so hard that 3 coffee cups rattled off their saucers. He pointed his finger 2 inches from his wife's face and snarled, "You have no business being in this room. You are nobody." The entire board sat frozen. Chloe gripped her notepad and said nothing. For 11 years, he had told Sarah she was invisible. For 11 years, she had let him believe it. But the woman he was threatening right now, the woman he was trying to humiliate in front of 30 witnesses, was not his quiet, obedient wife anymore. She was his CEO, and she already owned everything he thought was his. Before we go further, if you are watching this and you love stories about justice, betrayal, and the kind of strength that most people never see coming, please subscribe to our channel right now and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let us begin. Mark Thompson had never once in his life believed that the universe owed him anything. He simply took what he wanted, and he had been taking for a very long time. On the morning of October the 14th, he walked through the glass doors of OmniCore Solutions with the kind of confidence that only belongs to men who have never truly been held accountable. His shoes were Italian leather. His suit was custom tailored. His tie cost more than most people's weekly grocery bill. He was 45 years old, vice president of global sales at one of the largest logistics corporations in the Midwest, and he felt, on that particular Tuesday morning, as though the entire world was finally about to tilt in his direction. He pressed the elevator button for the 22nd floor and pulled out his phone, scrolling through a string of messages from Chloe Bennett, his assistant. She had been sending him updates since 7 in the morning. Arrival time confirmed. Boardroom reserved. Coffee service arranged. Presentation slides loaded. She was thorough. She was attentive. She was also the woman he had been carrying on an affair with for the past 2 years, and he saw absolutely nothing wrong with any of it. Mark, his colleague, David Reyes, caught the elevator door before it closed and stepped inside, slightly out of breath. "You hear anything about the new CEO? Nobody's talking. Legal's been completely sealed up for 3 weeks. "Relax," Mark said, not looking up from his phone. "These private equity takeovers always come with theatrics. Whoever it is, they're going to need people who actually know how this company runs. And that's us." David lowered his voice. "I heard the investment group is based out of San Francisco. Some venture firm called SJ Ventures. You ever heard of them?" Mark finally looked up. He thought for just a moment, then shook his head. "No. Should I have?" "I don't know. Something about the name felt familiar. I can't place it." Mark waved a hand. "Doesn't matter. By end of day, we're going to have our marching orders, and everything goes back to normal. Maybe better than normal." He smiled. "I've been waiting for this kind of shakeup. New leadership means new opportunities." David did not look convinced, but he said nothing else. When the elevator doors opened on the 22nd floor, the hallway was unusually quiet. There were no assistants rushing between offices, no loud phone conversations bleeding through glass walls, no mid-morning chatter from the sales team. The floor felt like it was holding its breath. Mark liked it. He walked to his office, dropped his briefcase on the desk, and sat down. He had 40 minutes before the all-hands executive briefing. 40 minutes to review his numbers, rehearse his talking points, and make sure that when the new CEO walked through that boardroom door, the first face they saw clearly, the first name they remembered, was his. His phone buzzed. A message from Chloe. "I'm here. Conference room C is all set. Do you want me to come to your office first?" He typed back quickly. "Yes, come now." She appeared in his doorway 2 minutes later, dressed sharply in a navy blazer, with her hair pulled back. She was 29, quick on her feet, and had been quietly moved from a general administrative role into a special position that Mark had created specifically for her. Senior Strategy Liaison, a title that meant nothing on paper, but carried a salary of $250,000 a year, buried beneath 3 layers of budget codes that no one at her level was supposed to notice. "Everything's set," she said, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. "The board packets are printed, the slides are synced, and I confirmed the outside guests will arrive at 9:45. "Good." He stood and adjusted his tie in the small mirror near the window. "I want you in the room with me today." She paused. "In the boardroom? Mark, is that appropriate?" "I'm introducing you as my lead strategist on the Pacific Coast accounts. You've been on those calls. You know the numbers as well as I do." "That's not entirely true," she said, and for a brief moment something moved across her face, a flicker of discomfort, maybe even warning, before it disappeared. "But okay, if you want me there." "I do." He picked up his briefcase. "Walk with me." They left his office side by side and moved down the hallway toward the executive wing. A few colleagues glanced up from their desks. Some looked away quickly. Others watched a second too long. Mark noticed, and he enjoyed it. He had always enjoyed the subtle theater of walking through a room like he owned it, because in many ways, he believed that he did. What he did not know, what he could not have possibly prepared himself for, was that the office he had walked through every single day for 11 years, the company he had manipulated and shaped and quietly stolen from for nearly a decade, did not belong to him at all. It never had. And the woman who truly owned it was, at that exact moment, stepping out of a private elevator on the 23rd floor, flanked by 2 corporate attorneys and a woman from HR who had been flown in from San Francisco specifically for this day. Sarah Jennings had not slept. Not because she was nervous. She had not been nervous about this in a very long time. She had not slept because she had spent the night reviewing the final audit report, page by page, line by line, making sure every number, every account, every wire transfer, every fabricated client file was documented, time-stamped, and verified by 2 independent forensic accountants. She was not walking into that room to be dramatic. She was walking in to be precise. Her assistant, a composed woman named Patricia, handed her a leather portfolio as they walked. "The board members have been notified that the briefing will run longer than scheduled. Legal is already in position. The federal liaison confirmed they are on standby." "Thank you," Sarah said quietly. "Are you ready?" Sarah paused at the boardroom door. From the other side, she could hear the low murmur of voices. Executives settling in, chairs adjusting. The polite and slightly tense energy of a group of people who knew something significant was about to happen, but did not yet know how significant. She straightened her jacket. "I've been ready for 18 months. She opened the door and walked in. The murmur stopped. Every head in the room turned. Mark Thompson, who had been leaning sideways in his chair, saying something to Chloe with an expression of practiced ease, looked up, and the color left his face. Not slowly, not gradually. It left all at once, like someone had simply reached in and turned off a switch. His mouth stopped moving mid-sentence. His hand, which had been resting casually on the arm of his chair, went very still. Standing at the head of the boardroom table, dressed in a charcoal blazer, with her dark hair down and her eyes completely, unreadably calm, was Sarah Jennings, his wife. For 3 full seconds, no one in the room said anything. It was David Reyes, sitting 2 seats down from Mark, who let out a short, involuntary breath. Not quite a word, not quite a gasp, but something caught right in between. His eyes cut from Sarah to Mark and back again. Sarah set her portfolio on the table and looked out across the room. Her gaze moved steadily from face to face, greeting each person without a word, until she reached Mark. She held his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked away. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was level and clear. "My name is Sarah Jennings. I am the founder and managing partner of SJ Ventures, which, as of 30 days ago, completed its full acquisition of OmniCore Solutions. Effective today, I am assuming the role of Chief Executive Officer." She sat down. Mark had not moved. He had not blinked. He sat in his chair like a man who had just watched the floor open up beneath him and was still in the process of understanding that the fall was real. Chloe, sitting to his right, leaned slightly toward him and whispered, "Mark, who is that?" He did not answer her. Sarah opened her portfolio and looked at the first page. "Before we begin the formal briefing, I want to be direct with this group. There are several reasons I chose to make this transition quietly, without advance announcement to the executive leadership team. Those reasons will become clear over the course of this morning. I want to assure the board and the outside stakeholders in this room that everything that follows has been thoroughly reviewed by independent legal counsel and a certified forensic audit team." A man near the end of the table, Richard Crane, the CFO, shifted in his seat. "Mrs. Jennings, if I may, we were given no preparation time for—" "You were given exactly the preparation time I intended you to have, Richard," Sarah said, without looking up from her notes. The sentence was quiet, but it landed like a gavel. Richard closed his mouth. Mark finally found his voice. It came out lower than he intended, rougher, as though it had to fight its way up. "Sarah." She looked at him. "What is this?" She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said, simply, "This is a board meeting, Mark." She turned a page in her portfolio. "And we have a great deal to cover." He pushed back slightly from the table. His jaw was tight. He was thinking fast. She could see it in his eyes, the way they were moving, calculating, searching for the angle, looking for the exit. He was a man who had spent his entire career talking his way out of tight situations. And right now, every instinct he had was firing at once. "I think we need to speak privately," he said. "We will," she said, "at the appropriate time." "Sarah, Mark." Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. "We are in a meeting." Something in his expression cracked. Not broke, not yet, but cracked. A hairline fracture running right down the center of the confidence he had walked in with that morning. Chloe was looking between the two of them now with growing dread, her face beginning to assemble the picture she had been given no reason to expect. She pressed her lips together and folded her hands in her lap and stared at the table. Sarah began. She started, not with Mark, not with the affair, not with the betrayal that had broken what she had once believed was a real marriage. She started with the company, because the company was where she had all the evidence, and evidence was what the next several hours were going to be built on. She walked through the structure of OmniCore's sales division. She presented the revenue reports from the past 4 fiscal years. She showed the Pacific Coast account numbers, the flagship numbers that Mark had used to build his reputation inside the company. The numbers that had gotten him promoted, praised, and trusted with increasingly large budgets. She paused at a specific slide. "These are the Pacific Coast accounts as they appear in our official earnings documentation," she said. 12 major clients, representing a combined annual revenue contribution of $68 million. She looked around the table. "I want to ask the executive team a question. Has anyone in this room personally verified these client accounts in the past 2 years?" Silence. Richard Crane looked at his hands. The head of internal audit, a man named Stephen Park, slowly shook his head. "No," Sarah said evenly. "They have not. Because there was a standing directive, verbal, never written, that the Pacific Coast accounts were to be handled exclusively through the VP of Global Sales. No secondary review, no audit trail. Does anyone want to tell me who issued that directive?" More silence. "I have the emails," she said. And she did. Mark's knuckles went white against the table. She pulled up a second document. 3 of these 12 client accounts do not exist. They are fabricated entities, shell companies registered in Delaware and Nevada, with no employees, no physical addresses, and no actual business operations. The revenue they appear to generate flows through a series of internal transfers that, when traced, deposit back into accounts controlled by a single individual at this table. The room had gone from quiet to airless. Sarah did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She simply turned her gaze to Mark Thompson and said, with a kind of calm that can only come from absolute certainty, $3.4 million, Mark. Over 4 years. Do you want to tell them, or should I continue? Mark stood up. This is... He stopped. He tried again. You can't walk in here and... I can, she said. I own the company. You can't do this in front of... In front of who, Mark? Her voice remained steady, but something beneath it shifted, like a tectonic plate moving very slowly beneath the ocean floor. In front of your colleagues? In front of the board? In front of the woman you brought into this meeting and introduced as your protégé? Her eyes moved briefly to Chloe, then back to him. I'm doing this exactly where it belongs, in the open. He sat back down, not because he wanted to, because his legs made the choice for him. Chloe had gone completely still. Her hands were flat on the table now, and she was staring straight ahead. And anyone watching her could see that the carefully constructed version of her life, the important title, the extraordinary salary, the powerful man who had promised her the world, was coming apart at the seams, thread by thread, in real time. Sarah continued. She moved through the audit findings methodically. Expense reports for international travel that had never been authorized. Client entertainment invoices for events that no client had attended. A conference registration fee for a summit that had been canceled 2 years prior, but the reimbursement had never been returned. Each item was small on its own. Each item was documented. And together, they told a story that was not complicated at all. A man had been stealing. He had been stealing from the company. He had been stealing from the shareholders. And without knowing it, or perhaps, Sarah thought, suspecting it and choosing to look away, he had been stealing from her. 40 minutes into the meeting, the first executive was asked to leave. His name was Philip Gordon, Senior Director of Vendor Relations, and he had been the man who processed the shell company invoices without asking questions, in exchange for a yearly bonus that had been quietly doubled for 3 consecutive years. When the HR representative asked him to step out, Philip stood up, looked at Mark once, a look that contained equal measures of accusation and fear, and walked out without speaking. The door closed behind him. Mark watched it happen. He watched it, and he understood, with a sinking certainty that felt physical, like gravity doubling on his chest, that this was not going to be over quickly. This was not going to end with a conversation, or a deal, or a quiet settlement. Sarah had not come here to negotiate. She had come here prepared, organized, and utterly without mercy. He thought about the penthouse. He thought about his car. He thought about the credit cards in his wallet and the accounts they were attached to. He thought about Chloe sitting next to him, and what she must be thinking, and what she was going to say when this was over. He thought about 11 years of marriage, and what he had done with them, and the fact that the woman across the table from him, the woman he had underestimated every single day, had apparently known about all of it for a very long time. Mark. Sarah's voice cut through his thoughts. He looked at her. I'm going to ask you a direct question, she said, and I want you to understand that your answer, whatever it is, has already been anticipated. He said nothing. Did you know, she asked, that the family trust that your Pacific Coast revenue was being partially routed through, the Jennings Family Trust, belongs to me?" The room waited. Mark's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "Answer the question," said one of the board members. Very slowly, Mark Thompson leaned back in his chair. He let out a breath. And in that moment, watching him, several people in the room saw something they had never expected to see on his face. Not anger, not defiance, not the sharp-edged survival instinct that had carried him through every professional crisis of his adult life. They saw the face of a man who had finally run out of moves. "I didn't think," he started. "No," Sarah said quietly. "You didn't." The next two executives were dismissed before noon. By 12:30, Chloe Bennett had been escorted from the boardroom by security, her keycard deactivated, her work email already suspended. She had not looked at Mark when she stood up. She had gathered her notepad and her pen and her phone, and she had walked out without a word, and the sound of her heels on the marble floor faded quickly down the hallway. Mark sat alone on his side of the table. The board members who remained looked at him with expressions ranging from quiet disgust to barely concealed shock. David Reyes, the man who had ridden the elevator with him that morning full of nervous questions, was staring at the window. Sarah closed her portfolio. "There will be no termination today," she said. Mark looked up sharply. A board member to her left frowned. "Ms. Jennings, given the severity—" "I know what I'm doing," she said simply. "Mark will remain with the company. Effective immediately, he is being reassigned to the Compliance and Audit Recovery Division, 12th floor, as a junior account reconciliation analyst." She looked at Mark directly. "He will spend the next several months personally reviewing, documenting, and certifying every fraudulent transaction he created. His own records will form the basis of the federal referral." The board member stared at her. "You want him to build the case against himself?" "He already has," she said. "I just want him to finish it." The silence in the room was the kind that presses against the walls. Mark looked at Sarah. He searched her face for something. Mercy, or maybe regret, or the ghost of the woman he had once stood beside at an altar and made promises to. He found none of it. What he found instead was something far more unsettling. Patience. The kind of patience that does not come from waiting for justice. The kind that comes from having already won, long before the battle was ever made visible. He opened his mouth. Then he closed it. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, Mark Thompson had absolutely nothing to say. Sarah gathered her papers. She looked around the room at the remaining board members, and the legal team, and the silent, stunned faces of people who had come to a morning meeting expecting change and receive something they were not going to forget for the rest of their professional lives. "We'll take a 30-minute recess," she said. "When we reconvene, we'll discuss the restructuring plan and the new executive appointments." She stood. "Help yourself to coffee." She walked to the door. She did not rush. She moved the way people move when they are entirely at home in their own power. Steadily, without performance, without drama. At the door, she paused. She did not turn around, but her voice carried clearly back into the room behind her. "Mark," she said, "someone from HR will show you to your new desk." And then she was gone. The 30-minute recess felt like 30 years. Mark sat in the boardroom alone because no one had offered him a different room, and he could not bring himself to stand up and walk out into the hallway, where his colleagues were gathered in small, quiet clusters, talking in the hushed voices of people who have just witnessed something they do not have words for yet. He could feel them out there. He could feel their eyes through the glass wall even when he was not looking at them. He stared at the table instead, at the ring his coffee cup had left on the polished surface, at the legal pads and uncapped pens abandoned by the people who had been asked to leave. His phone had 17 notifications. He did not touch it. David Reyes came back into the room at the 20-minute mark. Not because he was required to, but because, Mark understood, David was the kind of man who could not stay away from a disaster. He sat down 2 chairs away and looked at Mark for a long moment before speaking. "How long have you known?" David asked. "Known what?" That Sarah was... David stopped, started again. That she was capable of this. Mark laughed. It came out wrong. Too short, too sharp, like a sound made by a machine that was close to breaking. "I didn't know anything. That's the point." David was quiet for a moment. "She bought the whole company, Mark. She didn't just buy stock. She bought the whole thing. Do you understand what that takes?" "Yes," Mark said. "I understand what it takes." "Did you have any idea she had that kind of money?" Mark pressed 2 fingers against his temple. Her father was Raymond Jennings. David stared at him. The name landed visibly. He could see David processing it, rearranging what he knew. Raymond Jennings had been one of the most successful early-stage investors in Silicon Valley history. 3 of his portfolio companies had gone public at valuations above $4 billion. He had died 6 years ago and left behind a fortune that the financial press had estimated, conservatively, at just over $900 million. "Her father," David repeated. "Her father." David sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. "And you never, in 11 years of marriage, you never—" "She never talked about it," Mark said. His voice was flat. "She handled the foundation. She went to charity events. She was home with the kids. She was—" He stopped. He heard himself. He heard what he was saying, and more than that, he heard what it revealed. And for the first time since Sarah had walked through that door, something that was not anger and was not fear moved through him. It was smaller and quieter and far more difficult to sit with. It was the recognition that he had never once asked. He had never asked about her work because he had assumed there was nothing to ask about. He had never asked about her finances because they were his finances in his mind. The money he earned, the accounts he managed, the world he had built and that she had simply lived inside of. He had looked at his wife of 11 years and seen what he wanted to see, a background figure, soft-voiced and accommodating, and had never once considered that the accommodation might have been a choice. His phone buzzed again on the table. He looked down. The screen showed a number he did not recognize, a Chicago area code, and beneath it, a text message preview. "Mr. Thompson, this is Agent Dana Reyes from the FBI Financial Crimes Division. We'd like to schedule a preliminary interview at your earliest—" He turned the phone face down. David had seen the screen. He said nothing, but his expression said everything. The boardroom door opened, and Patricia, Sarah's assistant, stepped inside. "We're reconvening in 5 minutes, she said, looking directly at Mark. "Ms. Jennings asked me to let you know that an HR representative will meet you here after the meeting concludes. They'll walk you through your reassignment paperwork." "Reassignment?" Mark repeated. "Yes, sir." Patricia's voice was professional and completely without sympathy. 12th floor. They'll have everything ready." She left. Mark looked at his phone on the table. Then he looked at David. "She's not bluffing," he said. "No," David agreed. "She's not." The board reconvened at 12:58. Sarah walked in precisely on time, set her portfolio down, and picked up exactly where she had left off, as though the break had not happened at all, as though the morning had not been the single most extraordinary thing that any of the people in that room had ever professionally witnessed. She introduced the new executive appointments first. 3 names. 2 of them brought in from outside the company, and one, a woman named Claire Sutton, who had been quietly overlooked for promotion for 4 consecutive years, elevated internally. Claire, who was sitting near the back of the room in the observer section, pressed her lips together when her name was announced and looked down at her hands. And Mark, watching from across the table, realized that Sarah had done that deliberately. That the decision to promote Claire in this room, on this day, in front of all of them, was not incidental. It was a message. The second part of the restructuring presentation covered the audit recovery program. Sarah explained it in plain language, without legal jargon, without euphemism. The company had been defrauded. The defrauding party was currently seated at the table. Rather than suspending that individual pending investigation, which would remove his direct knowledge of the account structures, the company would instead utilize his expertise in reverse. He would work within the compliance division to map every fraudulent transaction, reconstruct every falsified record, and produce a complete documentation package that would be handed to federal investigators. "Is that legally permissible?" asked one of the outside board members, a man named Harold Fitch, who had flown in from New York and had the look of someone who had expected a much quieter day. "Our legal team reviewed it thoroughly," Sarah said. "Mr. Thompson is not being coerced. He is being offered an alternative to immediate termination with cause, which would accelerate the federal referral. The choice, as I mentioned earlier, is his." Harold looked at Mark. "And you're agreeing to this?" Everyone looked at Mark. Mark thought about the FBI text message sitting face down on his phone. He thought about the penthouse and the car and the accounts. He thought about what termination with cause looked like on a federal fraud indictment. He thought about his lawyer, who he had not yet called, and what that lawyer was going to say when he did. "I need to speak with my attorney," he said. "Of course," Sarah said. "You have until end of business today." The meeting ended at 2:15. Mark walked out of the boardroom into a hallway that felt nothing like the one he had walked through that morning. The same marble floors, the same glass offices, the same corporate art on the walls. But every person he passed either looked away too quickly or looked at him too long. The architecture of a workplace had shifted in the span of a single morning. He was no longer the man whose approval people sought, whose name people dropped, whose presence in a hallway changed the energy of a room. He was something else now. He was the cautionary tale. He was the reason the forensic accountants had been here for 3 weeks. He made it to his office, closed the door, sat down. He called his lawyer, a man named Gregory Holt, who had handled Mark's professional contracts for 9 years. Gregory picked up on the second ring. "I was wondering when you'd call," Gregory said. "I saw SJ Ventures completed the OmniCore acquisition this morning. That's Sarah's firm." Mark closed his eyes. "You knew?" "I knew SJ Ventures had been acquiring shares over the past 18 months, yes. I didn't know it was Sarah's until the registration documents filed this morning." A pause. "Mark, how bad is it?" "Bad." Another pause. Longer. "How bad is bad?" Mark looked at his desk, at the framed photo in the corner, himself and Sarah at the company Christmas party 4 years ago. Both of them smiling. Him with his arm around her shoulders, her laughing at something off camera. He had never thought about that photo. It had just been there, the way furniture is just there. 3.4 million, he said quietly. That's what she documented in the meeting. There may be more. Gregory's exhale was audible. Wire transfers? Some. Shell companies? Yes. Mark. Gregory's voice dropped. If there's a federal referral already in motion. She said end of business today. She wants me to agree to work in compliance, audit my own accounts, build the documentation package. That's... Gregory stopped. That's actually smart, on her part. It accelerates the process, and it keeps you from lawyering up immediately and slow-walking everything. So what do I do? Right now? Nothing. Do not sign anything. Do not access any company accounts. Do not contact anyone inside OmniCore about the substance of what happened this morning. Gregory's voice was precise and urgent. And Mark, do not contact Sarah. She's my wife. She is your opposing counsel's client. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? Mark understood. He sat in his office for the next 40 minutes doing exactly nothing. He did not touch his computer. He did not make calls. He watched the city through his office window. The traffic 22 floors below. The clouds moving over the lake. The unremarkable Tuesday afternoon that was continuing its normal business, entirely indifferent to the fact that his life had just been methodically and irrevocably disassembled. At 3:10, there was a knock on his office door. It was a woman from HR named Donna. She was carrying a thin manila folder, and her expression was the practiced neutral of someone who has delivered difficult news enough times that the delivery itself no longer registers emotionally. Mr. Thompson, I'm here to walk you through the reassignment protocol. He let her in. She placed the folder on his desk and opened it without sitting down. Your current credentials will be suspended as of 4 o'clock today. You'll receive a new access badge for floors 1 through 12. Your parking is reassigned to Level 2, Structure B. Your new workstation is on 12, East Wing, Station 44. She paused. You'll be reporting to the Compliance and Audit Recovery Supervisor, a Ms. Angela Torres. Mark stared at the paperwork. Angela Torres. Yes. He knew Angela Torres. She had joined OmniCore 3 years ago as a mid-level compliance analyst. He had denied her request for a team budget increase twice. He had once referred to her, in an executive meeting, as the woman from compliance who sends too many emails. Fine, he said. Donna slid a page toward him. I need your signature acknowledging the reassignment. This is not an admission of anything. It is simply confirmation that you received the terms. He signed it. Donna collected the folder, thanked him in the flat tone of someone fulfilling a requirement rather than offering a courtesy, and left. Mark sat alone. He thought about calling Chloe. He did not know why. Habit, maybe, or the specific human instinct to reach toward warmth when cold is setting in. But he remembered that her keycard had been deactivated, that her email was suspended, that she had walked out of the boardroom that morning and had not looked at him when she did. And whatever they had been to each other, whatever story he had told himself about what they were, had not survived the room it had been exposed in. He did not call. At 3:55, he packed his briefcase. Personal items only. A photograph, a charger, a book he had been meaning to read for 6 months, and had carried back and forth to the office as though proximity to a book was a substitute for actually reading it. He left his company laptop on the desk. He left his executive-branded coffee mug on the shelf. He left the key fob for his reserved parking space in the top drawer, because Level 2, Structure B, required a different one. He rode the elevator down to 12. The East Wing was quieter than 22, more densely populated with workstations, fluorescent lights instead of the diffused architectural lighting the executive floors used. The carpet was older. The windows were smaller. People glanced up when he walked in, and then looked back at their screens with the deliberate casualness of people who had been briefed that he was coming. Station 44 was a standard-issue cubicle. A monitor, a chair, a desk with a small set of drawers. The computer was already logged in to a restricted access portal that contained exactly one folder. OAST Recovery. Thompson, M. The folder held 412 files. He sat down. He stared at the screen. 412 files. Every shell account, every fabricated client, every rerouted transfer, every inflated expense. Organized, labeled, and waiting. He had created every single one of them. He knew exactly what was in each file. He knew the passwords, the account structures, the routing patterns. He knew which transfers would look clean on the surface and which ones would unravel fast once someone who knew what they were looking at pulled the thread. He had built this architecture to be invisible. Now he was going to map every inch of it. He opened the first file. The name on the account was Pacific Coast Innovations, LLC, one of his 3 ghost companies. Registered in Nevada, $900 in annual filing fees, no employees, a mailing address at a commercial mailbox service in Las Vegas. He had opened it 4 years ago during a period when his and Sarah's marriage was quiet in the way that things are quiet before they break. Not peaceful, just still. He had told himself, at the time, that the money he was moving through it was temporary. A loan he would repay, a correction he would make later, when things settled, when the timing was right. The timing never got right. The money never went back. He stared at the transaction log on his screen. Dates, amounts, account codes, columns of numbers that he had entered himself, many of them at this very company, from a much nicer desk on a much higher floor. The cursor blinked. He started typing. He was still typing 40 minutes later when he heard footsteps stop at the entrance of his cubicle. He did not look up immediately. When he did, he found himself looking at Chloe Bennett. She was not carrying her notepad. She was not carrying anything. She was wearing the same navy blazer from that morning, and she looked like someone who had spent the last several hours crying in a bathroom and had decided to stop. And the decision showed. In the set of her jaw, in the way she was holding her shoulders, slightly too upright, slightly too controlled. Mark pushed back from the desk. "Chloe." "They called me," she said. Her voice was steady, but only barely. "An hour ago. The attorney. They said I had 2 options. I could retain my own counsel and face referral as a co-conspirator, or I could cooperate fully with the audit and accept a reduced role within the recovery program." Mark was very still. "And?" She laughed. It was not a happy sound. It was the laugh of someone who realizes too late that a map they trusted was drawn by someone who wanted them lost. "I took the deal, Mark. What choice did I have? You told me the salary structure was approved. You told me the accounts were legitimate. You told me—" She stopped herself, pressed her lips together. "You told me a lot of things." "Chloe, don't." The word came out sharp and quiet. "I don't want an explanation. I've had 6 hours to think about every conversation we've had about this company, and I can follow the line now, all the way back to the beginning. I don't need you to draw it for me again." She turned and walked 4 steps down the aisle. Then she stopped. She turned back. "Which station is mine?" she asked, and the question was so blunt, so stripped of everything except practicality, that it hit him harder than anger would have. He pointed. The empty cubicle beside his. Station 43. Chloe looked at it for a long moment. Then she sat down, turned on her monitor, and did not speak to him again. The 2 of them sat side by side in the east wing of the 12th floor of a company that no longer had any use for either of them, except as instruments of its own recovery, typing in silence while the building emptied out around them, and the Tuesday afternoon faded, and the city outside the narrow windows went gray, then dark. Mark saved his work at 7:18 and shut the monitor off. He picked up his briefcase. He walked to the elevator. He rode it down to the lobby, where the security desk had already been updated with his new badge access, and the guard looked at his ID with the careful attention of someone who had received specific instructions. He walked out onto the street. The night air was cold in the way Chicago was cold in October. Committed to it, unapologetic. The kind of cold that does not negotiate. He stood on the sidewalk outside the building he had walked out of 10,000 times before, and nothing about it felt familiar. He reached into his coat pocket for his car keys, the fob for the BMW that had been parked in his reserved executive spot for 3 years, and his fingers closed around the new fob instead. Level 2, Structure B. He had walked half a block before his phone rang. Unknown number. Chicago area code. He stopped on the sidewalk, looked at the screen. The same FBI number from the afternoon text. He let it ring. It rang 6 times. Then it stopped. Then a voicemail notification appeared. He stood there on the sidewalk, briefcase in his hand, the cold moving through his coat. The city continuing around him in every direction. And he did not listen to the voicemail. Not yet. Not tonight. He walked to the parking structure. He found Level 2, Structure B. He got in the car, a company vehicle, mid-range, the kind of car no one looks twice at. And he sat there without turning the key. 22 floors above him, the lights in the executive suite were still on. He knew without looking that Sarah was up there. He knew she was still working. He also knew, with the slow, leaden certainty of a man who has run out of moves on every board simultaneously, that whatever she was working on up there, it was already done. He listened to the voicemail the next morning. He sat in the parking structure of his apartment building. Not the penthouse. Not yet. He had not gone back there the night before. He had driven instead to a hotel 3 miles away and sat on the edge of the bed in his work clothes until sometime after midnight, when exhaustion finally made the decision for him. And he played the message on speaker with the volume low, as though keeping it quiet might reduce what it contained. The agent's voice was measured and courteous in the way that federal agents are courteous when they are not yet required to be otherwise. Her name was Dana Reyes. She identified herself as a special agent with the FBI's Financial Crimes Enforcement Unit, Chicago Field Office. She said she understood this was a difficult time and that she simply wanted to establish a preliminary line of communication before formal proceedings were initiated. She said she hoped he would return her call at his earliest convenience. She said the word convenience like she knew exactly how inconvenient everything was going to be. Mark set his phone on the passenger seat and stared at the concrete wall in front of him. He called Gregory. His lawyer answered immediately, which told Mark that Gregory had also been awake early and had also been waiting. "I got a call from their office yesterday afternoon," Gregory said, skipping the greeting entirely. "Dana Reyes. She's good, Mark. She's been on financial crimes for 11 years. If she's the one making contact, they're not fishing. They have the package. Sarah gave it to them. Sarah's attorneys filed the referral 3 weeks ago, before the acquisition even went public." A pause. This was always going to happen. The meeting yesterday was the visible part. The legal machinery has been running underneath it for months. Mark pressed his forehead against the steering wheel. "What do I do?" "You come to my office, today, 8:30, and you bring every piece of personal financial documentation you have access to. Not company accounts, nothing that touches OmniCore. Personal accounts, personal assets, tax returns for the last 5 years. Gregory's voice was controlled but tight. The voice of a man assembling a very complicated puzzle, while knowing some of the pieces are already gone. "And Mark, I need you to answer me honestly before we go any further. Is there anything beyond what she presented in that boardroom? Anything she doesn't know about?" Mark was quiet for 4 seconds. "Mark, but it was funded by—" "Yes." Gregory did not say anything for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Not angry, resigned. The way a doctor sounds when a patient admits they ignored the symptoms for a year longer than they should have. 8:30, he said. "Do not be late." Mark drove to Gregory's office. He arrived at 8:22. He sat across from his lawyer in a conference room with bad coffee and signed paperwork that he did not fully read because reading it would have required him to absorb what it said, and he was not yet capable of absorbing anything. Gregory walked him through the exposure framework, what the federal charges could look like, what cooperation might reduce, what the offshore account added to the picture, and how much worse everything became if that account surfaced on its own rather than being disclosed proactively. "She's going to find it," Mark said. "She finds everything." "Then we disclose first," Gregory said. "It changes the conversation with the prosecutor." "You think they'll offer a deal?" Gregory looked at him steadily. "I think your best asset right now is the fact that you're already inside the building documenting the fraud. That was very deliberately engineered, and I think Sarah's attorneys knew exactly what they were doing when they structured it that way. You are simultaneously the subject of the investigation and the instrument of it. That is an unusual position, and it creates an unusual kind of leverage." He tapped his pen on the table. "But only if you are completely, entirely transparent from this point forward. One more hidden account, one more undisclosed transfer, and the leverage disappears." Mark nodded. Gregory leaned forward. "I need to ask you something else. The woman, Chloe Bennett. What exactly did she know?" Mark looked at the table. "She knew the accounts existed. She thought they were legitimate. I told her they were approved structures." "Did she ask questions?" "A few, early on. I answered them in ways that satisfied her." "In other words, you managed her knowledge?" "Yes." "Okay." Gregory wrote something down. "Her cooperation with the audit is actually helpful to you in a specific way. It corroborates the story that she was operating on your representations. It makes the fraud your design, not a conspiracy. That distinction matters." Mark said nothing. At 9:45, he left Gregory's office and drove to OmniCore. He badged in through the ground floor entrance, rode the elevator to 12, walked to the East Wing, and sat down at Station 44. The monitor was already on. The OAST recovery folder was open where he had left it the night before. The cursor was blinking on file number 7. He had 385 files left. He picked up where he had stopped. At 10:20, Chloe arrived. She set her bag on the floor beside Station 43, sat down, logged in, and opened her own assigned folder without speaking. Her folder, he could see from the corner of his eye, was a subset of his, the expense reports and vendor invoices that had passed through her hands during her time in the special liaison role. Her task was to annotate each one with what she had been told at the time of processing, and what she now understood to be false. They worked in silence for 90 minutes. Then Chloe said, without looking away from her screen, "Your children called the office yesterday." Mark's hand stopped on the keyboard. "The main reception line," she said. "Your son, he's... How old is he now?" 14, Mark said. "He asked if his father still worked here." The receptionist didn't know what to say. Chloe paused. "She told him yes, because technically that's true. She didn't know what else to tell him." Mark stared at his screen. The cursor blinked inside a transaction field. He did not type. "I thought you should know," Chloe said quietly. She did not say anything else. He thought about his son, Nathan, 14 years old and already carrying his father's jawline and his mother's eyes, which was a combination that Mark had always found quietly beautiful and had never said so directly, because that was not the kind of man he was, or had been, or had believed himself to be. He thought about his daughter Emma, who was 11, and who liked to read, and who had her mother's way of watching a room from the corner of it, taking everything in, without appearing to take anything in at all. He picked up his phone. He started to dial home, Then he remembered Gregory's words. Do not contact Sarah. He put the phone back down. He returned to file number 7. At 1:15, Angela Torres appeared at the entrance of the East Wing. Angela was 41, precise in the way people become precise after years of working in environments where imprecision costs them. And she had a specific quality of attention, a focused, unhurried watchfulness that Mark now recognized he had badly underestimated during the 3 years she had worked 2 floors below him. She walked directly to Station 44 and set a printed document face down on his desk. The offshore account, she said, keeping her voice low. Cayman Islands, Meridian Trust Structure, opened March 2019. Do you want to tell me how you'd like to handle this, or would you prefer I flag it formally before end of day? Mark stared at her. The blood in his face went somewhere else. How did you... Your attorney's office submitted a disclosure filing this morning, she said. I received it 40 minutes ago. She was watching him with the neutral, professional expression of someone who has stopped being surprised by the things people hide. I'm giving you the courtesy of a conversation before this goes into the formal record. But it goes into the formal record regardless, so the conversation is about how, not whether. Understood, he said. Angela picked up a chair from the empty station across the aisle, turned it around, and sat down facing him. Walk me through it. Everything. Who set it up? When? How the funds got there? And whether there are any secondary accounts you haven't disclosed. There are no secondary accounts. She looked at him. I'm going to ask you that question every time we have this conversation. And I'm going to keep asking it until the audit is complete. So I want you to think carefully before you answer. He met her eyes. There are no secondary accounts. Angela nodded slowly. Then let's talk about Meridian. They talked for 40 minutes. Angela took notes by hand in a spiral notebook, asking precise questions in a quiet voice, redirecting when his answers began to drift toward explanation rather than fact. She was not unkind, but she was absolutely merciless in the way that only truly competent people are merciless. Not through cruelty, but through the simple refusal to accept anything less than the complete truth. When they were finished, she stood and returned the chair to its place, with the same economy of motion she brought to everything. I'll have this incorporated into the formal documentation by tomorrow morning, she said. You'll review and sign off on the summary before it goes to legal. And then? And then it goes to the federal liaison. She paused. For what it's worth, the disclosure helps. Not everything, but something. She looked at him once more, the same watchful look, and walked away. Mark sat very still at his desk for a long time after she left. He had spent 11 years building a life inside a set of walls he had constructed through other people's labor, other people's trust, and, it turned out, other people's money. He had believed the walls were his because he was the one who moved through them so confidently, so loudly, so absolutely certain of his own centrality. It had never occurred to him to look at who had laid the foundation. He went back to the files. At 4:45, the elevator on the East Wing opened and 3 people stepped out. 2 men in identical dark overcoats, and a woman in a gray blazer carrying a leather satchel. They spoke briefly with Angela Torres at the end of the aisle, and Angela walked with them to the small conference room near the fire stairs. The door closed. Chloe had seen them too. She turned to Mark for the first time all day, with something in her eyes that was not quite fear, but was close enough to it. Who are they? Federal, Mark said quietly. Chloe turned back to her screen. She took a slow breath and pressed her palms flat on the desk and kept working. Mark watched the conference room door. The 3 people were in there for 1 hour and 17 minutes. When they came out, they did not look at the East Wing. They walked back to the elevator, the woman with a leather satchel, carrying slightly more than she had come with, and the doors closed and they were gone. Angela came back to Station 44 at 6:02. She set a single sheet of paper on Mark's desk, It was a notification from the U.S. Attorney's Office, copied to Gregory Holt. It confirmed receipt of the disclosure documentation and informed the subject of the investigation that a formal grand jury proceeding was being considered. It was no longer preliminary. Mark read the page twice. Then he folded it and put it in his briefcase. He should have called Gregory. He knew he should call Gregory. Instead, he sat at his desk on the 12th floor and did the thing he had been doing all day. The thing that was now, in the most brutal possible irony, the most useful thing he could do for anyone. He opened the next file and kept working. File 41. Westfield Logistics Partners, LLC. Shell Company, Number 2. Registered in Delaware, 2020. He typed. He was still typing at 7:30 when his phone buzzed with a text from a number he did know. It was Nathan, his son. "Dad, Mom said you're still at the office. Are you okay?" Mark stared at the message for a long time. He typed back, "I'm okay. I'll explain everything soon. I love you." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Then Nathan wrote back, "Okay. Emma wants to know if you're coming home." Mark set the phone down face up this time. He did not answer right away. He looked at the screen, and he looked at the files, and he looked at Chloe 2 feet to his left, who had read the exchange over his shoulder, the way people read things that are impossible not to read when you are sitting inches away from them, and whose expression, when she looked away, had something in it that was not sympathy exactly, but was in the same neighborhood. "Go," she said quietly. "What?" "Go home, Mark, wherever home is now." She was looking at her own screen. "The files will be here tomorrow." He almost said something. He almost said that he was not sure where home was, which was the honest answer. He almost said thank you, which would have been absurd given everything. He almost said her name, just to say it, just to mark that they had both survived this particular day. He said none of it. He picked up his briefcase and walked to the elevator. He did not go to the hotel. He drove to the brownstone on the north side, the house he and Sarah had bought 8 years ago, and then largely stopped living in after they moved to the penthouse. The house they had kept because Sarah had said she wanted a stable place for the children, a house that was not a showpiece, a house with a yard. He had agreed to keeping it without thinking twice about it. He had not been there in 4 months. He sat in the car on the street outside and looked at the lit windows on the 2nd floor. He could see a shadow moving across the curtains. Small. Quick. Emma. He got out of the car. He rang the doorbell. 30 seconds passed. The door opened. It was Sarah. She was not in a blazer. She was not in the charcoal CEO jacket she had worn to dismantle his career in front of 30 people. She was in a dark sweater, and her hair was down, and she was holding a dish towel, and she looked, for exactly 1 fractured second before her expression closed back to neutral, surprised. They stood there in the open doorway. "The kids asked me where you were," she said finally. "I know," Nathan texted. "I told them you were working late. I didn't tell them anything else." She held the door steady, but did not open it wider. "What do you want, Mark?" "To see them." A long moment. "They're doing homework," she said. "I know. I'll be quick." Another pause. Then she stepped back and let him in. The house smelled like dinner, garlic and something baked, and the hallway had Nathan's basketball shoes kicked against the wall the way they always were. And there was a drawing of Emma's on the refrigerator that Mark could see from the entryway. A horse. She had always drawn horses. She had been drawing horses since she was 4 years old. He stood just inside the door. Sarah crossed her arms and watched him. Not with anger. Not exactly. With the look of someone who is prepared for every version of this moment, and is now simply observing which version has arrived. "How long did you know?" he asked. He kept his voice low, not because the children could hear, but because the question deserved a quiet voice. Sarah tilted her head slightly. "Which part?" "The affair. How long did you know about Chloe?" 14 months before the acquisition was complete," she said. Mark absorbed that. "And the money?" "About the same time." She unfolded her arms and set the dish towel on the counter. "I hired a forensic accountant 6 weeks after I confirmed the affair. It took her 3 months to find the first shell company. After that, it moved quickly." "You could have confronted me," he said. "You could have—" "I could have." Sarah looked at him steadily. "And you would have denied it, transferred the accounts, and disappeared whatever you could disappear. And we would have spent 4 years in a legal fight over what I couldn't prove anymore." She paused. "I chose a different way." Mark looked at her. This woman he had lived beside for 11 years and had never fully looked at. "Are you—" He stopped, started again. "Are you glad that it went this way?" Sarah thought about it. He could see her actually thinking about it, not performing consideration, but genuinely sitting with the question for a moment, which was such a specifically Sarah thing to do that it hit him somewhere behind his ribs. "I'm glad the children have a stable home," she said. "I'm glad the company is going to recover. I'm glad the people who were defrauded are going to be made whole." She picked the dish towel back up. "Whether I'm glad in the way you're asking, I don't know yet. I'll know better when it's over." From upstairs came the sound of footsteps, fast ones, and then Nathan appeared at the top of the stairs and came down them 2 at a time and said, "Dad," with the specific mix of relief and uncertainty that belongs only to teenagers who love a parent they are no longer sure they can trust. Mark crossed the hallway and put his arms around his son. Nathan hugged him back hard, the way he used to when he was 8, before the age of performance set in, and Mark closed his eyes and held on. Emma appeared at the top of the stairs a moment later. She looked down at her father and her brother, and then she looked at her mother, who was leaning against the kitchen doorframe, watching them, with the dish towel folded in her hands and an expression on her face that nobody in that hallway could have named precisely, but that everyone could feel. "Dad," Emma said carefully, "are you staying for dinner?" Mark looked up at his daughter. He looked across the hallway at his wife. He thought about the voicemail and the files and the cubicle and the offshore account and the grand jury notification folded in his briefcase and the entire weight of what the next months were going to require of him. He thought about what it had cost to get here. He thought about what it had cost Sarah. "No, sweetheart," he said. "Not tonight." Emma nodded. She came down the stairs anyway and let him hug her, briefly. And then she went to the kitchen, and he heard her ask her mother something about dinner. And he heard Sarah answer in the steady, warm voice that she used with the children. The voice he had taken for granted for 10 years, without ever naming it as something worth keeping. He said goodbye at the door. Sarah walked him out. They stood on the front step in the October cold for a moment. "There's one more account," she said. Her voice was low, calm, completely without surprise. "Meridian Trust. Your attorney filed this morning." He looked at her. "You already knew." "I knew 2 months ago," she said. "I was waiting to see if you'd disclose it." The cold pressed in around them. "And did it matter?" he asked. "That I did?" Sarah looked at him for a long moment. "It matters to your attorney," she said. "It matters to the federal timeline." She paused. "It matters in the ways that count right now." She went back inside. The door closed. Mark stood on the step for a moment in the dark. Then he walked back to his car, and he drove away. And the lit windows of the brownstone got smaller in his rearview mirror, and then disappeared entirely as he turned the corner, and the city filled in around him, indifferent and enormous, and entirely unchanged, as cities always are, by the private catastrophes of the people moving through them. The weeks that followed moved the way certain kinds of pain move, not in waves, but in a steady, unrelenting pressure that does not peak and does not release, that simply continues, day after day, until the body adjusts, and the adjustment itself becomes its own kind of loss. Mark Thompson woke every morning at 6:15 in a hotel room on the north side of Chicago that he had extended week by week because signing a lease required a credit check, and his credit score had dropped 41 points in the first 2 weeks of November alone. The BMW had been repossessed on a Wednesday morning. Not dramatically, not with a tow truck at dawn the way he had half expected, but with a single certified letter from the leasing company explaining that the account it was attached to had been frozen as part of the federal asset review, and that the vehicle would be collected at his convenience or theirs, and that their convenience was Friday. He took the bus to work on the following Monday, for the first time in 18 years. He sat in the back and stared at his phone and did not speak to anyone. The penthouse was the harder loss, though he would not have predicted that. He had believed, when he thought about it at all, that the hotel room would be the thing that ground him down. But the penthouse, the 43rd floor with the lake view and the kitchen he had never once cooked in, and the walk-in closet he had filled with suits that were currently being inventoried as potential assets. The penthouse had turned out to belong entirely, and without complication, to the Jennings Family Trust, which meant it had always belonged to Sarah, which meant that every time he had stood at that window, looking out over the city, feeling like a man at the top of the world, he had been standing on someone else's floor. He moved a rolling suitcase of clothes into the hotel room and told himself it was temporary. It was the first week of November. At work, the rhythm of the 12th floor had settled into something that felt, despite everything, almost ordinary. He arrived at 8:30. He opened the OAST recovery folder. He worked through the files, one at a time, with a methodical attention that he had never once applied to anything legitimate. There was a particular cruelty in that, the fact that the skills he had used to build the fraud were the exact skills required to dismantle it. The same eye for account structure, the same understanding of routing sequences, the same memory for the logic he had used to layer each transaction beneath the next. He was, as it turned out, extremely good at this work. Angela Torres had told him so directly, in the flat, factual way she said most things. "You think like an auditor," she said one afternoon, standing at his desk, reviewing his documentation on file 63. "I thought like a thief," he said. She looked at him. "Same skill set, different application." She set the page down. "That's not a compliment." "I know," he said. Chloe worked beside him every day. They had developed a strange, functional proximity. Not friendship, nothing close to it, but the particular intimacy of two people who share a catastrophe and have no choice but to continue sharing space inside its aftermath. She brought coffee sometimes. He held the elevator. They did not discuss anything personal. They worked. And in the working, in the slow accumulation of documented truth, something shifted between them that was not forgiveness and was not understanding, but was perhaps the thinnest edge of mutual recognition. Two people seeing each other, finally, without the performance either of them had been sustaining. On November 8th, 3 weeks after the boardroom, Mark received a certified envelope from Gregory Holt's office. He opened it at his desk. It was a formal separation agreement, filed by Sarah's legal team. Clean, comprehensive, and already largely complete. The division of assets was laid out across 14 pages with the precision of someone who had been preparing it for a long time and had made sure that every line was airtight. He read it twice. Then he called Gregory from the stairwell, because the stairwell was the only place on the 12th floor with any actual privacy. "She's not asking for anything that isn't already hers," Gregory said. "The trust assets, the brownstone, primary custody with flexible visitation. She's not going after your pension or your personal accounts, the ones that weren't touched by the fraud." "That's—" Mark leaned against the concrete wall. "That's more than I would have expected." "It's strategic," Gregory said carefully. "Going after everything would complicate the federal case. It would create contested assets that could delay proceedings. She's keeping it clean." A pause. "She's keeping everything clean. That's been the consistent pattern." "How long do I have to respond?" 30 days. But, Mark, the longer you wait, the more it looks like you're trying to negotiate. My advice is to sign it in the next 2 weeks." He stood in the stairwell for a long time after he hung up. He thought about 11 years. He thought about the altar and the vows, which he had meant, at the time, in the way that people mean things they have not yet been tested on. He thought about the morning the children were born, Nathan first, then Emma 2 years later, and the specific feeling of holding each of them for the first time, the terrifying smallness of them, the absolute demand their existence made on him to be something better than he had previously bothered to be. He had felt it. He had genuinely felt it, and then, gradually, incrementally, through 100 small choices that each seemed manageable in isolation, he had put it down. He thought about what it costs to put something like that down. He signed the agreement on November 14th. Sarah acknowledged receipt through her attorney. No personal communication. No call. He had not expected one, which did not make the silence easier. The first twist came on November 19th. Mark arrived at work at 8:28 to find Angela Torres waiting at his cubicle, rather than her usual office at the end of the wing. She was holding a printed document, and her expression was the kind of careful neutral that, he had learned over the past weeks, meant she had something significant to say, and was organizing how to say it. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She set the document on his desk. "The forensic team completed the secondary trace on the Pacific Coast accounts last night." She pointed to a line near the bottom of the first page. "There's a transaction we couldn't reconcile. $37,000, March 2021, routed through Pacific Coast Innovations into a contractor payment account. Do you know what this is?" Mark looked at the line. He felt something drop in his chest. Not guilt. He was past the initial shock of guilt by now. But something worse. Recognition. "That was personal," he said quietly. Angela did not move. "Personal how?" "My daughter's medical bills. She had surgery. An emergency. The insurance covered most of it, but there was a gap. The pediatric specialist wasn't in network, and the bill came in at $42,000. I moved the money through the contractor account to cover it." He paused. "I told myself I would put it back." Angela looked at him for a long moment. "Did you?" "No." She picked the document back up. "This doesn't change the total materially, but it changes the documentation, and it changes the narrative the federal team is building." She was quiet for a second. "Was there anything else like this? Any transaction you moved for something that was genuinely personal rather than—" "No," he said. "That one's the only one." She studied him. "The reason I'm asking before it goes to the federal liaison is that there's a difference between transactions that served your lifestyle and the transaction that paid for your child's surgery. That distinction exists in federal sentencing guidelines. It does not eliminate exposure, but it exists." She paused. "I need to know if the full picture is on the table." "It is." She nodded. She took the document and walked back to her office. Mark sat at his desk and thought about Emma in the hospital 3 years ago, 11 days. The waiting, the fear, The specific helplessness of watching your child in pain and not being able to do anything except pay for the people who could. He had made the decision in 15 minutes, moving the money without thinking past the immediate problem, and he had told himself it was a loan, and he had never paid it back. And it had sat in the account records for 3 years, like everything else he had buried and ignored. He had buried so many things. He went back to the files. On November 22nd, David Reyes appeared at the East Wing for the first time since the boardroom. He stood at the entrance of the aisle for a moment, looking down the rows of cubicles with an expression that was uncomfortable in a way that was clearly not just about the environment. Then he walked to Station 44. "Hey," he said. Mark looked up. "David." David stood there with his hands in his pockets, and he was clearly trying to decide what kind of visit this was. Professional, personal, obligatory, and failing to land on any of them cleanly. "I just wanted to—" He stopped. "HR told me I need to complete a witness statement about the elevator conversation, the morning of the acquisition announcement." "About me telling you the takeover would elevate us?" "Yeah." David looked uncomfortable. "I have to document what I heard, what you said. My attorney told me I need to cooperate fully." "You should," Mark said. "Document exactly what I said. All of it." David blinked. You don't have a problem with that?" "No." Mark looked back at his screen. "It's true, isn't it?" A pause. "Yeah," David said quietly. "It's true." He stood there for another moment, and then he said, in a different voice, lower, less official, "For what it's worth, I didn't know about any of it." "I know you didn't," Mark said. "That's why you should document it." David left. Chloe had heard the whole exchange. She did not comment, but he saw her glance at him sideways, just once, and there was something in it that he could not quite name. Not quite respect, but an acknowledgement of something. He went back to the files. December arrived. The hotel room had a heating unit that cycled on and off loudly all night, and Mark had stopped sleeping well in the sustained, rested way he used to sleep, which was the sleep of a man who had offloaded all his weight onto other people. Now he woke at 2, at 3:30, at 5. He lay in the dark and thought about the files. He thought about his children. He thought, sometimes, about the specific moment in the boardroom when Sarah had walked through the door and every assumption he had ever made about his life had simply stopped being true. He did not think about Chloe in those hours, not the way he once had. Whatever he had felt for her, and he was no longer entirely sure how much of it had been feeling and how much had been the particular comfort of being needed by someone who did not yet know his failures, had faded into something he could not name and did not try to. On December 4th, he completed file 220, just past the halfway point of the 412. Angela had told him, in one of their daily check-ins, that the federal team was working in parallel, building their own case from the documentation he was generating, and that the pace of his work was directly correlated to the pace of the proceedings. The faster he worked, the sooner everything moved. The sooner everything moved, the sooner the shape of the rest of his life would become visible. He worked faster. On December 9th, a Monday, he arrived at Station 44 to find a single sheet of paper on his keyboard. It was a printed email from the U.S. Attorney's Office to Gregory Holt, forwarded to Angela Torres, carbon copied to the OmniCore legal team. It informed all parties that the grand jury had returned an indictment on 3 federal counts: wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud, and that the defendant would be notified through counsel by end of business. Mark read it standing up. He had known it was coming. He had known since the day Angela first showed him the formal federal notification. He had known since the boardroom, in some deep and honest part of himself, that the indictment was where this road ended. But knowing a thing and reading it in print are different experiences, and the difference sat in his chest like a stone. His phone rang. "Gregory," he answered. "I've spoken with the prosecutor's office," Gregory said immediately. "They're offering a plea structure. 3 counts, reduced sentencing recommendation in exchange for the cooperative documentation work. The guidelines for your exposure without the plea are 8 to 12. The recommendation with the plea, given full cooperation, is 5 to 7, with eligibility for reduction based on conduct." Mark was very still. 5 to 7. With the cooperation credit, the actual served time could be closer to 4. That's not a guarantee, but it's realistic. Gregory's voice was precise, careful, the voice of a man delivering a sentence while trying to leave room for the person receiving it to breathe. "Mark, this is the best structure available to you at this point. The documentation you've produced is working in your favor. The Meridian disclosure, the voluntary cooperation, the child medical payment clarification, all of it matters. But the indictment is real, and the evidence is complete, and there is no version of this where we go to trial and win." "I know," Mark said. "Do you want to take the weekend to think about it?" Mark looked at the OAST recovery folder on his screen, file 221, waiting with its cursor blinking. 200 more files behind it, each one a transaction he had created, a choice he had made, a small fracture in the foundation of something that had once been real. "No," he said, "I don't need the weekend." Gregory paused. "You're sure?" "Yes." "Okay, I'll contact the prosecutor's office this afternoon." Mark hung up and sat down and opened file 221. The second large twist came 3 days later on December 12th. And it came not from legal or federal channels, but from Chloe. She arrived at Station 43 at 8:55, which was later than usual, and she sat down without taking her coat off for a full 2 minutes, which was not like her. Mark noticed, but said nothing. He had learned, over the past weeks, that Chloe's silences had textures to them, and this one had weight. At 9:08, she said, "I need to tell you something." He turned from his screen. Her hands were flat on the desk. She was looking at them. "When I took the cooperation deal, I submitted a full written statement to the federal team about everything. My role, what I knew, what you told me, when I began to suspect things weren't what you said they were." She paused. "There was one thing in my statement that your attorney probably hasn't seen yet." "What?" he said. She looked at him. "In the fall of 2022, you asked me to pull the Jennings family trust documentation from Sarah's personal file. You said you needed to verify a routing number. I pulled it." She held his gaze. "I knew what the trust was. I knew it was Sarah's. And I gave it to you anyway." The East Wing was very quiet. "I told myself you had a legitimate reason," she said. "I told myself a lot of things." She looked back at her hands. "But the federal team's timeline shows that the first routing from the family trust into Pacific Coast Innovations happened 6 days after I pulled that document. And I am not going to pretend I didn't know that was possible when I gave it to you." Mike was quiet for a long moment. "You're amending your statement," he said. "I already did," she said. "Yesterday morning. My attorney filed it." She took a slow breath. "I wanted to tell you directly, before you found out through legal, because—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "Because I owe you that much. The truth going one direction, even if it was late." Mark looked at her. This woman he had manipulated and used and dressed in a borrowed importance and installed beside him as though her proximity to his power made them something real. He looked at her, and he thought about the morning she had walked out of the boardroom without looking at him, and about every file she had annotated on this floor over the past 7 weeks, with the same careful honesty she had just extended to him. "Thank you," he said. She nodded. She took her coat off. She turned to her screen. They worked. On December 18th, Gregory called with the plea agreement finalized. Mark signed it from a conference room on the ground floor of the Federal Building on South Dearborn, in a room that smelled like old paper and central heating, with Gregory beside him and a prosecutor across the table who looked, Mark thought, no older than 35, and no more moved by the moment than he would have been by any other Tuesday afternoon procedure. He signed his name on 5 pages. He stood up. He shook no one's hand. He walked out into the December cold on South Dearborn, and he stood on the sidewalk, and he breathed in the cold air, and he thought about 4 years. About what 4 years looked like from the inside. About Nathan at 18 when he got out. About Emma at 15. About the person he might be on the other side of it, which was a question he had never seriously asked himself about anything, and which now felt like the only question worth asking. Gregory stood beside him. "The arraignment is scheduled for January 6th. You'll surrender on March 1st, pending sentencing." "March 1st," Mark repeated. "You have 2.5 months. 2.5 months. He thought about the files still waiting on the 12th floor. 192 remaining. He thought about Angela Torres and her spiral notebook. He thought about the station beside his, which would be empty soon because Chloe's cooperation agreement ran through December, and she had told Angela last week that she had been offered a position at a small non-profit audit firm in Indianapolis, and she was going to take it. He pulled out his phone. He texted Nathan. "Can I take you and Emma to dinner this weekend?" 3 dots, then, "Yeah, Emma says Saturday." Then a second message from Nathan. Just 3 words. And they were not dramatic words, and they were not words that solved anything. But they were the kind of words that keep a person vertical when nothing else is. "We miss you." Mark put his phone in his pocket and stood on South Dearborn in the cold for 1 more minute. Then he walked back to the parking structure, got on the bus, and rode 12 stops north to OmniCore. He badged in. He took the elevator to 12. He sat down at station 44. He opened the OAST recovery folder. File 222. He typed. 3 rows over, near the window, a woman he did not know well was on the phone with someone, half laughing at something, and the sound of it moved through the east wing like light through an ordinary window. Unremarkable, warm, completely indifferent to catastrophe. He kept typing. At 4:15, Angela came to his desk for the daily check-in, and she stood there reviewing his output for file 222 with her usual focused attention. And when she finished, she said, as she had said several times before, "Good work." And it was not a soft thing to say, and it was not meant to comfort him. It was simply accurate, and accuracy was the only currency left that meant anything. He accepted it. He went back to the files. Above him, 22 floors up, Sarah Jennings was meeting with the new executive team. She was presenting Q4 projections that showed OmniCore on track to exceed its restructuring targets by 17%. The new VP of Global Sales, Claire Sutton, the woman who had been overlooked for promotion 4 consecutive years, had brought in 2 legitimate clients in November alone. Real ones, with real addresses and real operations and real revenue that did not need to be hidden anywhere. The company was recovering. It was recovering the way things recover when the rot is removed entirely. Not gradually, not with reservation, but with the particular energy of something that has been given, at last, the conditions it needed to grow. Mark did not know any of this in detail. He knew it in outline, the way you know the weather on a street you cannot see. Not by looking at it directly, but by the way light falls at a particular angle through a narrow window, and the quality of cold in the air when someone opens a door, and the simple, irreducible fact that the world outside does not stop moving simply because you have temporarily lost your place in it. He worked until 6:45. He saved file 222. He closed the folder. He picked up his briefcase. He walked to the elevator, and he rode it down to the lobby. And he pushed through the glass doors into the Chicago December. And he did not look up at the 22nd floor. And he did not stand on the sidewalk this time. He just walked. Mark finished them on January 2nd, a Thursday, 4 days before his arraignment, and 58 days after he had sat down at Station 44 for the first time, with 412 files waiting in a folder that he himself had built the architecture for. He closed the final file at 6:51 in the evening, saved it, and sat for a moment looking at the empty folder. The OAST Recovery tab showed a completion status of 100% for the first time, and the green indicator in the corner of the screen was a small and entirely undramatic thing, but he stared at it for a long time anyway. Angela Torres came to his desk at 7:05. She had clearly been waiting for the status to change because she arrived within minutes of it, which told him she had been watching the portal from her office. She stood at the entrance of his cubicle and looked at the screen, and then looked at him with the expression of someone completing a calculation she had been running for weeks. "That's everything?" she said. "That's everything," he said. She nodded once. She pulled her spiral notebook from under her arm, made a mark on the final page, and closed it. It was the same notebook she had used for every check-in since October. It was nearly full. "I'll certify the completion package tonight and transmit to the federal liaison first thing tomorrow." She paused. "The documentation you produced is the most comprehensive voluntary fraud audit this office has processed in 11 years of doing this work." Mark looked at her. "Is that supposed to make me feel something?" "I don't know what it's supposed to make you feel," she said. "I'm just telling you the fact." She tucked the notebook under her arm again. "Go home, Mark." He went to the hotel. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at his phone for a while without using it. Then he ordered room service for the first time since he had checked in, which felt like a significant thing, but wasn't. And he ate without tasting anything. And he fell asleep before 10 o'clock, and slept without waking until 6 the next morning, which was the first uninterrupted sleep he had gotten since October 14th. The arraignment on January 6th was brief and procedural, in the way that formal legal proceedings are brief and procedural when the outcome is not in question. Mark stood before the judge in the federal courthouse on South Dearborn, with Gregory beside him, and entered his plea. The courtroom was not crowded. There were no cameras in the hallway. Federal financial fraud cases do not typically draw press in the way that more visceral crimes do. But there was a reporter from the Chicago Tribune who had been following the OmniCore story since the acquisition announcement, and who sat in the back of the gallery with a notepad. Mark saw him when he walked in, but did not look at him again. The judge set sentencing for February 20th. Mark walked out of the courthouse into the January cold with Gregory, and they stood on the steps, and Gregory went through the timeline with the precise, organized care he brought to every conversation. And Mark listened, and nodded, and asked the questions he needed to ask. His surrender date was March 1st. He had been assigned to a federal correctional facility in Duluth, Minnesota. Minimum security. Gregory explained what that meant in practical terms. Mark absorbed it. "How are you doing?" Gregory asked, which was not a question Gregory typically asked, and the fact that he asked it told Mark something about how he looked. "I'm okay," Mark said. I don't know. I don't have a better word than okay." Gregory nodded. "That might be the most honest thing you've said in a long time." Mark looked at him. "Probably is." Gregory patted his shoulder once, the brief, restrained gesture of a professional man expressing something he doesn't have the language for. And then he walked to his car, and Mark walked to the bus stop. January moved. He spent the first 2 weekends with Nathan and Emma, who came to the hotel on Saturday mornings and stayed through dinner. He had told them in December, directly, without lawyer language, without euphemism, where he was going and why and for how long. Nathan had sat very still during that conversation and had not cried, which was worse in some ways than crying, because the stillness was the stillness of a 14-year-old boy trying to be something he was not yet equipped to be. Emma had asked 3 specific questions. Will you be safe? Can we visit? And will you be home for my graduation? And the third question had hit him somewhere he did not have adequate defenses for. Because Emma's graduation was 7 years away, and he would be home for it, and he had said so clearly. But the fact that she needed to ask it, the fact that the question existed in her mind at all, was something he was going to carry for a long time. He took them to the Museum of Science and Industry on the second Saturday. They walked through the exhibits for 3 hours. Emma talked the entire time, about school, about her horse drawings, about a book she was reading, about everything and nothing, in the rapid, layered way the children talk when they are trying to paper over fear with information. Nathan was quieter, more watchful, checking his father's face periodically in the sideways way that teenagers monitor their parents, looking for cracks. On the bus ride back, Nathan sat beside him and said, without looking up from his phone, "Dad, did you know it was wrong when you were doing it?" Mark did not answer immediately. He thought about the question seriously, the way it deserved to be thought about. "Yes," he said. "Not all at once. At first I told myself it was complicated, but yes, I knew." Nathan processed that. His jaw moved slightly. "Why didn't you stop?" "Because I kept telling myself I would stop later, and later kept moving." He paused. "That's not an explanation. It's just what happened." Nathan looked out the window. "Okay," he said. "Just okay." But he did not move away, and his shoulder stayed pressed against his father's arm for the rest of the bus ride. And Mark held on to that, the way you hold on to the things that are small enough to fit in your hand when everything larger has been taken. On January 28th, the OmniCore story broke nationally. The Tribune piece ran first, followed within hours by the Wall Street Journal, and then Bloomberg. The coverage focused primarily on Sarah, on the acquisition, the strategy, the restructuring, and the remarkable speed of the company's financial recovery. The fraud was covered factually and without dramatization. Mark Thompson's name appeared in the 14th paragraph of the Tribune article, and the Wall Street Journal piece mentioned him once in the context of the federal plea agreement. He was no longer the story. He sat in the hotel room and read the articles on his phone and thought about how entirely the center of gravity had shifted. Not just professionally, not just legally, but narratively. He had spent his entire career building toward a specific kind of visibility, a specific kind of importance. And it was gone now, replaced by a footnote in someone else's success story, which was both humbling and, in a way he did not expect, clarifying. The journal piece quoted Sarah directly. One paragraph, a response to a question about the company's transformation. She said, "OmniCore had the infrastructure. It had the people. What it needed was accountability at the top. Once that was established, the rest followed naturally." She said nothing about him specifically. She said nothing about the marriage, the affair, the children, the brownstone, or any of the 10,000 private details that constituted the actual texture of what had happened. She had drawn a clean line between what was the company's story and what was hers, and she had protected everything on the personal side of that line with the same meticulous care she brought to everything else. He set his phone down. He thought about her for a long time. Not with anger, not anymore. Not even with the grief that had moved through him in November like weather. He thought about her with something closer to, he searched for the word, sitting alone in the hotel room in the late January afternoon. Closer to recognition. The recognition of someone finally seeing clearly a thing they had been looking at for years without actually seeing. He had believed she was quiet because she had nothing to say. She was quiet because she was listening. He had believed she was soft because she accommodated him. She accommodated him because she was building something that required his obliviousness as a structural element. He had believed she needed him. She had never needed him. She had chosen him, once, for reasons that were real, and he had treated that choice like a given, like furniture, like weather, like something that would always be there because it had always been there. He pulled out a legal pad from the nightstand. He had been using them to track thoughts the way other people use journals, with less sentimentality and more function. And he wrote, "The worst thing I did was not the money. The worst thing I did was decide she wasn't worth seeing." He looked at it. Then he put the legal pad away. The first truly large twist of the final chapter came on February 6th, 22 days before his sentencing. Gregory called at 8 in the morning, which was early for Gregory, and his voice had the particular quality of a person who has received information and is choosing the precise order in which to deliver it. "I need to tell you something," Gregory said, "and I want you to hear all of it before you respond." "Okay," Mark said. "Sarah's legal team filed a sentencing memorandum with the court yesterday afternoon." Mark waited. "It's a character letter," Gregory said. "A formal letter submitted by the opposing party to the sentencing judge on your behalf." The hotel room was very quiet. "On my behalf," Mark repeated. "Yes," Gregory paused. Mark, it's substantive. It's not perfunctory. She documented the cooperative audit work, the voluntary meridian disclosure, the consistency of your conduct throughout the investigation. She noted the child medical transaction separately and provided context for it. She told the court that in her assessment, the defendant's cooperation was not strategic performance, but genuine accountability. Another pause. She asked the court to consider the lower end of the sentencing guidelines. Mark sat on the edge of the bed. He did not say anything for a long time. "Mark? I'm here." "I've been practicing law for 24 years, Gregory said. "I have never seen a defrauded party voluntarily submit a favorable sentencing letter for the person who defrauded them. Not once." His voice was measured, but something moved underneath it. "Whatever you believe about what happened between you, I want you to understand what this cost her to write." Mark understood. He understood with a completeness that was almost physical, a weight settling through him that was not guilt, not grief, not relief exactly, but something that contained all three and was larger than any of them. He understood that Sarah had not done this for him. She had done it because it was true, because accuracy was the thing she had built everything on, and the accuracy required her to say what she said regardless of what it cost her personally to say it. She had been accurate when she acquired the company. She had been accurate when she presented the evidence. She had been accurate when she signed the separation agreement without asking for more than was hers. And she was being accurate now, in a federal courtroom filing, about the man who had broken everything they had built together. He did not call her. He did not text. He sat with it in the hotel room for 2 hours, and then he went for a walk in the February cold, and walked for a long time without direction, just moving through the city, letting the cold work, letting the movement work, until something in his chest that had been locked in a particular position since October unlocked one more degree. He went back to the hotel and picked up his legal pad. He wrote for 2 hours. He wrote everything. Not for Gregory, not for the court, not for any official record. He wrote for himself, which was something he had never done before in his adult life. And the writing was awkward and unformed, and stopped and started and crossed itself out and started again. And none of it was good writing. But all of it was honest. And honesty, it turned out, had a quality that talent does not automatically supply. He wrote about the first shell company and why he had told himself it was temporary. He wrote about Chloe and what he had been looking for in her that he had stopped looking for at home, which was the feeling of mattering to someone who had not yet found out the truth about him. He wrote about Nathan and Emma and the specific flavor of shame that came from loving your children fully while simultaneously making choices that contradicted that love at every practical level. He wrote about Sarah, not the CEO, not the opposing party, but the woman he had married at 34 in a garden in Connecticut, who had laughed during her own vows, not nervously, but with genuine delight, and who had looked at him on that day with the full force of who she was and what she was capable of, and whom he had spent 11 years slowly teaching himself not to see. He wrote, "I spent 11 years living in someone else's empire and calling it my own. The only original thing I ever built was the case against myself." He put the legal pad in his briefcase. He did not show it to anyone. Sentencing was February 20th. He stood before the judge in the same federal courthouse on South Dearborn. The room was slightly more populated this time. A few additional legal staff. The Tribune reporter again. A woman from the U.S. Attorney's Office who had not been present at the arraignment. Gregory stood beside him. The judge reviewed the documentation with the thorough, unhurried attention of someone who takes seriously the weight of what they are about to say. She noted the cooperative audit, the voluntary disclosure, the plea agreement, and the sentencing memorandum submitted by the injured party. She noted the memorandum specifically, pausing on it in a way that indicated she had read it carefully and found it significant. Then she looked at Mark over the top of her reading glasses and said, "Mr. Thompson, do you have anything you'd like to say to the court?" Gregory had prepared a statement. Mark had reviewed it the night before, made 2 small edits, and then decided, standing in the bathroom of the hotel at 11:30 at night, that he was not going to read it. He looked at the judge. "Your Honor, I have been given the opportunity for the past 3 months to review, in complete and documented detail, every choice I made that brought me to this court. I don't have an explanation that improves on that record. I had advantages that most people don't get, and I used them badly. I hurt people who trusted me. I hurt my children. I hurt my wife." He paused. "I don't have anything to add to what the documentation already says. I just wanted to say it out loud, in this room, because it's true." The judge looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at her papers. She sentenced him to 5 years with a recommendation for the minimum security facility and a formal notation of exemplary cooperation. With standard federal time reduction, Gregory had told him, the actual serve time would be closer to 4 years and 2 months. 4 years and 2 months. He stood very still and received it. He signed the necessary paperwork. He shook Gregory's hand. He walked out of the building into the February cold for the last time as a man with freedom of movement, and he stood on the steps for 1 minute, breathing the air. The Tribune reporter was waiting at the bottom of the steps. He was young, maybe 26, 27, and he had the slightly uncertain energy of someone still learning when to push and when to wait. "Mr. Thompson," he said, "do you have a comment for the record?" Mark looked at him. "No," he said. Then he thought about it for 1 more second. "Actually, yes. One thing." The reporter opened his notepad. "Don't underestimate the people who are quiet," Mark said. "That's it." He walked to the bus stop. March 1st arrived the way endings arrive when you have been counting toward them for a long time. Not with drama, but with a sudden completeness, a sense of the air changing pressure. He had spent the final week at the brownstone. Sarah had offered it without condition. The children wanted him close for the last days, she had said through her attorney, and she would stay at a friend's place, and he should not read more into it than what it was. He had not read more into it. He had accepted it simply and with gratitude, and he had spent 5 evenings helping Nathan with his history project, and watching Emma draw horses at the kitchen table, and cooking dinner, badly, and eating it anyway. And he had held those evenings in his hands like something fragile and irreplaceable, because they were. On the last night, after the kids were in bed, he sat at the kitchen table alone. The house was quiet, in the way only a house full of sleeping people is quiet. Not empty, but held. He sat there for a long time. His phone buzzed. A text. Sarah. The kids are okay. I'll make sure they stay okay. You don't need to worry about that part. He read it 3 times. He typed back, I know. Thank you. 3 dots appeared. Then, take care of yourself in there. For them. He set the phone face up on the table and looked at it for a moment. Then he wrote, I will. I'm sorry, Sarah. For all of it. You deserved better from the beginning. The 3 dots appeared and disappeared twice. Then nothing for a full minute. Then, I know. Get some sleep. He put the phone down. He sat in the kitchen of the house he had not built and had not paid for, and had not deserved for most of the time he had lived in it. And he felt, for the first time in his adult life, the specific and clarifying weight of having nothing left to hide. It was not comfortable. It was not peaceful, exactly, but it was real, in a way that almost nothing in the previous 11 years had been fully real. And realness, he was learning, had a quality that comfort does not replicate and cannot substitute for. He went to bed. He slept. The federal transfer vehicle arrived at 7:40 in the morning. He had a single bag, the rolling suitcase from the hotel, clothes and books and the legal pad. Nathan walked him to the door and stood there with his hands in the pocket of his sweatshirt and his jaw set in the way that was becoming his father's jaw. And Mark put both hands on his son's shoulders and looked at him directly and said, You are going to be exactly who you're supposed to be. Don't let what I did make you smaller. Let it make you more careful. Nathan nodded. He pressed his mouth together. Then he stepped forward and hugged his father hard, and Mark held on, and Emma appeared from behind Nathan and wrapped both arms around both of them. And the 3 of them stood in the doorway of the brownstone in the March cold for one long, complete, imperfect moment that none of them would forget. He picked up his bag. He walked down the steps. He got in the vehicle. He did not look back at the house. Not because he did not want to, but because looking back was a thing he had been doing his entire life. Looking back at what he wanted while walking away from it, or walking towards something else while telling himself the thing behind him would wait. He was done with that particular habit. He was going to look forward now, even when forward was a federal correctional facility in Duluth, and a bunk bed and 4 years of reckoning. Especially then. The vehicle moved north. The city fell away behind him. And on the 22nd floor of OmniCore Solutions, Sarah Jennings stood at the head of the conference table for the Q1 strategy meeting, her coffee untouched to her right, and the new executive team arranged around her. Claire Sutton presenting the Pacific Coast numbers, real numbers, legitimate numbers that pointed upward. And the morning light coming through the tall windows, the way it always had, indifferent and clean, falling on a company that was finally, entirely, running straight. The stock had tripled since October. The restructuring targets had been exceeded. 3 of the fabricated client accounts had been replaced by genuine partnerships. The internal culture had shifted in the quiet but unmistakable way that cultures shift when the person at the top treats honesty as a structural requirement rather than a preference. After the meeting, Patricia set a copy of that morning's Wall Street Journal on Sarah's desk. A section headline read, "Iron CEO turns logistics firm into quarter's biggest comeback story." Sarah looked at it for a moment. Then she set it aside, opened her laptop, and got back to work. That evening she drove to the brownstone. She put her key in the door. The house smelled like the dinner Nathan had apparently attempted. Something involving garlic and what she strongly suspected was a full box of pasta. And Emma was on the couch with a sketchbook. And Nathan was at the kitchen table doing homework with his earbuds in. And the particular irreplaceable sound of a house with children in it filled every room. Emma looked up when she walked in. "Mom, Nathan burned the pasta." "I did not burn it," Nathan said, without removing his earbuds. "I caramelized it." Sarah set her bag on the counter and stood in the kitchen of the house she had chosen, in the life she had reclaimed, surrounded by the only two people for whom she had ever been willing to build anything from the ground up. She looked at her children, her son with his father's jawline, and his grandmother's stubbornness, and the particular moral seriousness of a 14-year-old who has learned something real about consequences. And her daughter, with a horse drawing half-finished in her lap, and her mother's eyes, and a quality of quiet watchfulness that had nothing fragile about it. She thought about all of it. The 18 months of strategy, the acquisition, the boardroom, the files, the sentencing letter she had written in 2 hours on a Tuesday night because the truth required her to write it, and the truth had always been the only foundation she trusted. She thought about the version of herself who had stepped back from the corporate world a decade ago, not because she was not capable, but because she had believed, briefly, in a different kind of building. She did not regret that choice. She regretted that the person she had tried to build it with had not been equal to it. But she did not regret the trying, because the trying had given her Nathan and Emma, and Nathan and Emma were the best work she had ever done. She pulled out a pot for fresh pasta. "I've got it," she said. Nathan pulled out one earbud. "I said I didn't burn it." "I know you didn't burn it," she said. "I'm making more anyway." Emma smiled behind her sketchbook. They had dinner together, the three of them, at the kitchen table, and the conversation moved the way family conversation moves, in all directions at once, about nothing important and everything real. And Sarah sat at the table she had chosen in the house she had always owned, and ate the pasta she had cooked, and listened to her children talk, and somewhere in the space between one sentence and the next, she felt it. The specific, unhurried, unperformable quality of a woman who has done what she set out to do and is now, simply and completely, home. She had not won because she was smarter than him. She had not won because she was harder. She had won because she had never, not once in 18 months of strategy, allowed the injury to make her into something she was not. She had kept her own shape through the entire long pressure of it, and that was the thing, in the end, that could not be taken, could not be repossessed, could not be frozen by any federal asset review or dismantled by any boardroom reversal. You cannot confiscate a woman's character. You cannot repossess who she actually is. Mark Thompson had spent 11 years trying to live in her empire while pretending it was his own. And in the end, the empire was still standing, the queen was still at the table, and the only throne he had ever actually occupied was the one he had built entirely out of borrowed time.